All right, here we go. Welcome today. How are we on this Wednesday? Tired. All right. Tired. Anyone else? Got to plug your thing in?
Yeah.
Oh boy, gotta do that a little bit sooner. Probably, it's the key to success here. All right. Prep, all that stuff, but even best laid plans and all that stuff. So hopefully, I think right now, I think the adrenaline is probably come down in my system. But when you're gonna have a really good day when you go in the garage and you press the opener and then the garage door doesn't go up, or it does go up just like that, and it's like, so then what do you do, Molly? What do you do? You keep pressing the button, hoping it's going to go up. And it just doesn't go up. It goes up now. And, of course, Mrs. Newcomb's like, we're stuck. We're stuck. And it's like, don't worry. Don't worry. When that happens, what do? You always go and you pull that cable. So I go pull that cable, and it doesn't completely disengage. Then in my head, it's like, okay, we might be stuck. So then... So what do? Yeah, start walking? Yeah, I might have made it by now. That's a potential. That's a good one. No, you just go and you grab some tools and you start taking down some things that might be blocking the door. And then eventually I got the door up, and it's like, okay, this is good. This is good. Your door up, but water, all that stuff dripping on me, and my wife's looking at me, and I'm like, well, at this moment, you can just, how about take the cars out? Just take the cars out, and then we'll go from there. So that was 20 minutes of adrenaline just going there. So I think I finally come down, or still have it going through me because I had 2 Diet Cokes and all that stuff. All that. All right. So there we go. That's my start. That's my start. So we're tired, garage door, all that. All right. So today, our agenda is still continuing to look at Indigenous movement. I do have a couple video clips I want to highlight. One of them kind of gives an overview of the American Indian movement in the United States, or more specifically looking at civil rights issues for Indigenous people in the United States. And then a second clip I have is looking at some misconceptions that we might have. All right, so let me do that. So it'll be probably about 10 minutes, and after that, I'll cut you loose and to work on this activity here. Okay, so here, let me get my video clips here. All right, but first I have to mute.
The success of the civil rights movement in the 1960s encourages other minorities to assert themselves.
I grew up in Miami, and I was about, 8 or 9 years old at the time. I was fascinated by this sign over the water fountain that said colored, and I thought that water of different colors was going to come out of the fountain. And when I went to that fountain and touched it, my babysitter came running over, said, "Don't touch that, that's dirty. That has germs on it. That's for colored people." That's roughly 1961, 1962. That's the beginning of the 1960s. By the end of the 1960s, which we historians end in 73 or 74, that's something that you wouldn't find.
More and more during the 1970s, groups of Americans start to discover themselves and to organize around specific kinds of group identity, to see themselves as a distinct minority with distinct grievances, rights, and needs, and to assert proudly that form of identity. And so you see the kind of echoes of Black power, of minority cultural nationalism across the United States.
Few minorities have deeper or more justifiable grievances than Native Americans.
American Indians did not achieve citizenship en masse until 1924.
with the Indian Citizenship Act. So from the very founding to 1924, you have a group of people who are viewed as essentially aliens or wards, essentially. That was the terminology that the United States used.
Just as the war was ending, there was talk of terminating the formal treaty and executive order relationships of the United States with the various tribes, so that there would be no government-to-government relationship.
For much of the post-war period, the federal government seems determined to force Native Americans into the mainstream of American life.
And the idea was to set them up with positions, jobs, so that they could become mainstream Americans and have economic opportunities. And it worked to the advantage of some Indian people, at least initially. But what often happened was the initial job broke down and people ended up going unemployed and living in ghettos. And it separated people from their families, from their languages, from their cultural events, ceremonies that took place on the reservation. So it was difficult for lots of families.
Mimicking the civil rights movement, a group of Native Americans occupies Alcatraz Island to bring attention to their plight.
I remember George Horsecapture saying that the landing on Alcatraz Island was like the landing of the Marines at Iwo Jima, that there was something that dramatically had changed.
But then comes the incident known as Wounded Knee. It begins with the murder of a Lakota man in Custer County, South Dakota.
The decision was made that the person who had murdered this young man was going to get off very lightly, and it wasn't even going to be considered a murder. So the AIM people moved into Custer County and began threatening the county officials for what they had done. Things became very heated, and the AIM people decided to retreat to the Pine Ridge Reservation, to a small place that was symbolic of Native American history, a place called Wounded Knee. Then they proclaimed themselves an independent Oglala Sioux Nation in defiance of the United States. And the clash came at Wounded Knee. It ended in tragedy with some FBI people dying, but also a number of Native people dying.
Any takeaways from that? Anything that from that little clip that could tie into perhaps what you're working on right now? Maybe some events or things like that. Any thoughts? What do you got? What was that again? Yes, didn't receive citizenship until 1924. Generally, our thought, remember, with citizenship, if you're born here, it's granted upon you. But when it comes to indigenous people, they're viewed as, and we sometimes hear that today, as sovereign nations. And so that's not a guarantee. So again, when I think of my grandmother, she was born in 1909. One would say she wasn't a full U.S. citizenship, really, citizen until 1924, when the Citizenship Act is passed. And again, what is the goal, ultimately, behind the idea of giving indigenous people citizenship? Like anything that the United States government is doing, what's kind of like their goal? Really is to make indigenous people what? What's that? Yeah, more American, more American. So when we talk about immigrants coming to the United States, there's a process that immigrants go through to really become part of the United States. Something like a citizenship test is part of that. We might call it the acculturation or maybe assimilation type process. This is what that is. Citizenship is like that. My son, I remember a couple of years ago, in his sophomore class he took, he commented to me. He says, "Dad, man, I was taken back. My professor, he walks in, and it was a Native American Studies class, And he comes in and he's speaking fluent Dakota for 2 minutes, and then he identifies himself as, I am a forced citizen of the United States. And my son got taken back, and I said, well, that's probably because he views that he didn't have a choice on whether or not he wanted to be a citizen or not. He views himself more as a sovereign member of the Dakota Nation than part of the United States. And I said, you know, that's in college as well. You're going to get some professors, and you're going to come across people that are going to shock your system. All right. And so you got a little shock and awe moment there as well. That's big stuff. So that's a good point you brought up about citizenship. And then they mentioned something about termination in the 1950s. So that might be another thing that you focus on here when you look at events or policies. That was another part of Americanization, is if you get rid of the reservations, they're going to, where they're going to move to, perhaps. Where were some of these indigenous people moved to? If there's not opportunities on the reservation, they're probably most likely going to move to, like anyone, perhaps, if they don't feel like they have opportunities where they're from, they're going to move to the bigger cities. And if they go to the big city, in Minneapolis, big city, it's big city, or Los Angeles, New York, are they going to kind of blend in? Or you're part of a bigger population, and so they're probably viewing that as also as a way to Americanize. So it's all part of the bigger goal. You determine whether that's right or wrong. You know, I have thoughts, you have thoughts, and all that stuff. But I think it's interesting, you know, and my last point with that clip is some of the events that were occurring, like the Pine Ridge Uprising, occurred in Custer County, South Dakota. Do we know who Custer is? We haven't seen Night at the Museum 2, have we? Because Night in the Museum 2, Custard appears in it. Sometimes he's a General Custard. Sometimes he's a Colonel Custard guy. He gets busted and raked a number of times. He was a Civil War vet, last in his class at West Point. But Custard is probably the most well-known, most known U.S. Army officer that we have that fought a number of engagements against the Native Americans. So I think it's interesting that there are counties named Custard, and you have uprisings or you have conflict in Custard County. That's just a little connection piece there. All right, last video clip I have here about misconceptions about indigenous people. All right, and so this is kind of like, now we have our historical context, we have some events and some policies, but there are still some misconceptions that still remain here. And this can be in the outcome piece, and that can also fit into the BHQ, the big historical question. So here we got some teenagers here going to share some misconceptions about indigenous people. All right, so let's think about some many takeaways.
Hi, my name is Donette Rayom. I'm a Native American girl, and today you're about to get schooled.
We've evolved, and not all of us lived in teepees.
Teepees were made for only travel uses.
Well, we own one, but we don't live in it.
We don't live in it.
We just camp in it whenever we want to.
We use them for things like ceremonies or camping and such, but we don't live in them. I have to say to that, where is my check?
We really don't get anything for free. Everything we get, we have to work for it just like everybody else. If we had free healthcare, then the diabetes and heart disease rate would be very, very low. But at this point in time, it's very high.
Our dad works to provide for us. We don't get like money or anything.
We get schooling for free. That's not true either. We have to meet the same academic requirements as any other ethnicity.
You still have to apply for scholarships.
I thought it was just Donald Trump that didn't pay taxes.
If we were rich off of casinos, why would we need government money?
I think we just mostly lose our money to casinos. We all gamble.
Not all Native Americans wear headdresses. In some tribes, they don't wear them at all.
In my tribe, we don't wear headdresses, and we never did.
Women don't wear headdresses, and you have to earn them.
It wasn't just given to them or handed down to them. You have to earn every feather that makes up that headdress. If you were to buy a headdress, that would be disrespectful because there's no meaning behind it. You didn't do anything to earn it. All you did was pay for it. That's racist.
And a lot of people say that the redskin term comes from the color of our skin, but if you look at me, I'm not red.
Society is just played into it like the word redskins is okay when it's not.
The word redskin came about from the scalping of Native Americans. Redskin means the blood that was dripped from down on their faces.
That's a major league sports team, and their argument against changing the name would be just like me having a conversation with my mom, and my mom asked me, "Why don't you like Brussels sprouts?" Because I don't.
Not like we have a mascot that's called White Man.
In a way that's making fun of our culture and who we are. And we're human beings just like everybody else.
No, yes. And so there's no longer the Washington Redskins. A lot of that, again, if we look at a result of George Floyd, what happened last May. And then that sparked a whole re-examination. And part of that was the Washington Redskins. No longer going to be called the Washington Redskins. Now it's the Washington football team, as well as the Cleveland Indians have began to distance themselves from that. So again, we look at events and all those things and how it spreads out. You know, the casino money bit. I do have relatives that live out at Shakopee. You know, that's the home of Mystic Lake, and it's true that they at Shakopee get a nice subsidy from casinos. But as also pointed out, there are a number of indigenous tribes in the United States that don't get that. So they are what we'll call dirt scrabble poor. And so that's also a criticism and of indigenous groups that do have casino monies versus those who don't. If you're worried about Indian Nation, you should be helping out all. So that's a criticism. And so Shakopee, which it's called the Little Six, they have been giving out grants and monies to other indigenous groups to kind of address that issue, but they all don't, because the reservation my grandmother was enrolled at, they currently do have one. And so like some of my relatives are like, well, we got to get enrolled there. And I like to point out we can't, because if you read their constitution, it lays out that lineal descendants are not eligible to be members. And so, you know, you're gonna have to look at alternative routes and all that. All right. So any questions about just that little misconception piece? All right. So we've seen a couple video clips here. Hopefully some information in there resonates that could possibly help you in this process of looking at the indigenous movements. Whether, of course, my video clips are geared towards the United States. So if you're dealing with First Peoples in Canada or indigenous people in Latin America, then that's going to be a little different, right? One could say, though, what's happening in Canada in many ways parallels what's happening here in the United States. Okay. All right, but is there any questions? Any questions about the indigenous movement activity? Any questions at home about the Indigenous movement, please put it in the chat or on mute. If you are doing it on paper, and make sure you get a paper if you need to, because the next time we will come together as a class really is Monday. Is that correct? And so I want to talk about the next couple of days. Remember, tomorrow is MCAs, right? So 11th grade, you most likely have MCA math. Friday, Miss Ida and I, we've made that executive decision. We will not have a live Google Meet. So Thursday and Friday are going to be asynchronous days, which just basically means you work on this activity, okay? And if you are doing it on paper, those that are in the classroom, just bring it on Monday. Bring it on Monday, all right? I think that's it. All right. Those at home, if you don't have any questions, you can exit or stay on and ask questions. Those that are here, let's just dig in. Roll up those sleeves and dig in.